On the night I walked into that hotel, they didn't just refuse me a room, they refused me altogether. The receptionist's eyes didn't just say no vacancy, they said I wasn't wanted. But before that, there was a louder silence, one I'd carry long after the door slammed behind me. "There's no room for you here," they said, not because the hotel was full, but because I was the problem they didn't want to face. It hit me like a cold punch to the gut. After all I'd been through, after all the nights I dreamed of belonging somewhere safe, this was the truth laid bare. I wasn't just another guest turned away. I was invisible, erased from a place I'd hoped could be a refuge. And yet, the worst part wasn't the denial itself. It was the unspoken message behind it, that my presence made others uncomfortable, unwelcome. The polished marble floors gleamed beneath the chandeliers, but in that lobby, under those bright lights, I felt smaller than ever. The holiday buzz around me, laughter, clinking glasses, warm embraces, only sharpened the sting of exclusion. Outside, the cold winter air whispered freedom, but inside I was trapped by their judgment. I stood there heart pounding, eyes searching for a crack in their indifference, but there was none. That night I didn't just lose a room, I lost a piece of my hope. Yet even in that moment of rejection, a spark ignited deep within me. If they wouldn't let me stay, I vowed, I would change the rules of the game. I would make sure they remembered my name, and this was only the beginning. Friends, I'll take a short pause here. Please write in the comments where you're listening from. Have you ever experienced something like this in your own life? If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe and share this video. Your support helps us grow the channel. Now, let's continue. They didn't just turn me away. They left me stranded in the lobby, a ghost among the crowd. Their eyes slid past me, avoiding any acknowledgement, as if seeing me would somehow stain their polished world. The chandeliers sparkled above, but their light didn't reach me. Instead, I felt the weight of every cold glance, every whispered word that wasn't meant to be heard, but was loud enough in my mind. The hum of chatter and laughter swirled around me like a distant storm, isolating me even more. I sat on a hard bench, the fabric coarse against my skin, feeling smaller than I had in years. Outside, the biting wind reminded me I wasn't safe, not just from the cold, but from the people I once trusted to see me for who I was. The silence around me wasn't peaceful. It was a wall, an invisible barrier built to keep me out. Time slowed, each minute stretching longer, heavy with the knowledge that I was not welcome. No one offered a kind glance or a word of comfort. It was as if I'd become a mistake that needed to be ignored until I faded away. And in that quiet exclusion, something inside me hardened. Not bitterness, but a fierce determination. If this was how they saw me, then I would show them a new truth. I would carve out a place where no one could deny me again. Every closed door echoed like a verdict against me. Not just a denial of a place to sleep, but a rejection of my very existence in a world I once believed would hold me. It wasn't about the hotel rooms themselves, it was about the deeper wound of being erased, pushed aside as if my presence was a blemish on their perfect picture. I felt the weight of all those invisible barriers, walls not made of bricks, but of silent judgments and whispered doubts that told me I was unworthy. The dreams I had carried, the hopes I nurtured of finding belonging and peace, seemed to crumble like dust with every locked door. Memories of better days when I imagined this place as a refuge collided painfully with the cold reality that I was an outsider here. It was a sting sharper than any insult, because rejection from a place you long for feels like losing a part of yourself. The faces that looked away, the hands that refused to open, they weren't just denying a room, they were denying my story, my value, my right to simply be. In that moment, the ache was not just disappointment, but a profound loneliness, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you question your own worth. Yet, beneath that raw pain, something fierce was growing. A silent vow whispered inside me that I wouldn't be forgotten. I refused to let their judgment define me. This rejection would not be the end of my story, but the spark of its most powerful chapter yet. People around me didn't understand. Friends, even some family, asked why I didn't simply walk away, why I chose to stay in the shadow of their rejection, to linger where I was unwanted. To them, leaving seemed like the easiest, most reasonable choice. But to me, turning my back would have been surrender, a quiet admission that their judgment had the power to erase me. Leaving would have meant accepting their verdict, agreeing that I was nothing more than a name they could dismiss, a presence they could erase with silence. And that was a truth I refused to accept. Every moment I stayed was a statement carved out of pain and pride, that I existed, that I mattered, even if they refused to see it. In the quiet nights that followed, as I replayed the cold looks and the slammed doors, a chorus of whispered doubts circled in my mind. Was I chasing a lost cause? Was I fighting a battle I could never win? But then, beneath the noise of uncertainty, a steadier voice emerged, the voice of determination, the voice that reminded me why I couldn't give up. Because sometimes the fight isn't about winning immediately. Sometimes it's about standing firm long enough for the world to realize you're not invisible. And so, I stayed, not out of stubbornness, but out of a fierce love for my own worth, a refusal to let silence define my story. That silent defiance was the quiet roar that began to reshape everything to come. That night, after the doors had slammed and the lobby lights dimmed behind me, I sat alone in my car, the cold seeping through the windows, but failing to touch the fire burning inside. The silence around me was thick, filled with the echoes of all the times I had been dismissed, overlooked, pushed aside. Yet in that stillness, clarity arrived like a surge of electric resolve. If they wouldn't give me a room, if they insisted on shutting me out, then I wouldn't just accept their rejection. I would rewrite the entire story. I would own this hotel, every brick, every floor, every key that jingled behind a closed door. The idea wasn't born from anger alone, but from a deep hunger for justice, for dignity reclaimed. It was a promise whispered fiercely in the quiet of that car, that no one could keep me out of a place I belonged to, not by chance, not by prejudice, not by fear. I saw it clearly then. This wasn't just about a building or a night's stay. It was about taking control of my own narrative, about standing tall where they tried to make me small. My fingers clenched the steering wheel tighter, my breath steady and sure. This seed of resolve planted that night would grow into something unstoppable. And as the city lights flickered through the windshield, I made a vow to turn rejection into power, invisibility into undeniable presence. The road ahead would be hard, I knew that. But so was the pain of invisibility, and now I was ready to fight with everything I had. Morning bled into night and back again, the days marked not by sunlight but by the pale glow of spreadsheets on my screen. I learned the hotel's language one column at a time. Occupancy rates, ADR, RevPAR, numbers that didn't care who I was, only whether the math held. I pulled public records until my printer coughed warm paper like breath on a cold window. Deeds, liens, permits, old inspection notes that revealed the building's aches, a boiler patched too many times, a roof that had learned to swallow storms and keep quiet about it. In the margins, I listed what I would fix, not to prove a point, but to keep a promise to myself that this story would end with lights on and doors open. I built a small, steady circle around me. An attorney who read contracts like sheet music, hearing the discordant notes hidden between clauses. An accountant who stared at a P&L until it confessed where money hid and where it bled. A lender who spoke in cautious curves and stress tests, teaching me how to make the numbers stand, even when the wind rose. There were no grand speeches at that table, only the scrape of pens, the clink of cups, the quiet certainty that work was happening. I studied the rhythm of the place that had denied me. I stood across the street at dawn to watch the first shift arrive, their steps patient, their jackets zipped against a wind that didn't care about status. At midnight, I counted the taxis that pulled up, and the guests who slipped in, unseen by the day's glare. I learned the bones of the building, where the service elevators hummed, where deliveries entered, where the heartbeat of operations thudded behind a steel door labeled staff only. Each discovery was a stitch mending the tear they had left in me. Knowledge, piece by piece, became armor. There were setbacks that tried to rattle me. A seller who insisted the brand was stronger than the books showed. A broker who mistook my calm for inexperience. A week where the financing seemed to evaporate like a mirage just when I reached for it. I adjusted the model, trimmed vanity from the plan, let the essentials rise. The goal was never to punish. It was to build something sound enough that no one could pretend I hadn't earned it. At night, when fatigue pressed hard, I remembered the lobby lights and the way they threw my reflection back at me like a question. I answered it with small, relentless acts. I mapped every room count, every meeting space, every line of deferred maintenance, and what it would cost to bring it from tired to breathing. I read franchise agreements until the letters blurred, learned what it meant to carry a flag or to go independent, what fees were fixed and which could be negotiated, which standards were brand pride and which were just habit. I listened to vendors as if they were historians. Laundry, linens, food supply, every invoice a footnote in the hotel's biography. I formed the entity that would hold the deed, a clean name that felt like a vow. I funded the deposit from places that had taken years to build, savings distilled from early mornings and late nights. No one applauded. I assembled a transition plan line by line. Staff retention incentives, so good people wouldn't be devoured by uncertainty. A renovation schedule that respected both guests and the people who changed their sheets. A training calendar that replaced fear with skill. I wanted the building to feel the difference not as a shock, but as the steady hand of someone who had finally been allowed to touch what he cared about. Some evenings I drove past the entrance and watched the revolving door turn without me. The sting was still there, but it no longer owned me. It fueled me. Each document signed felt like a brick laid. Each risk measured felt like a key cut. I understood then that resolve is not thunder. It is the quiet engine that keeps going, long after applause would have faded. I made silent promises that no ledger could record. To be the kind of owner who remembered names, who saw the hands that made the rooms glow, who knew that dignity is an operational standard, not a marketing line. By the time the letter of intent took shape, clean, precise, non-refundable where it mattered, I wasn't chasing revenge. I was building a future that would not need anyone's permission to exist. The plan was not a weapon, it was a foundation. And beneath it, stronger than anger, steadier than pride, lived a truth I could finally hold without shaking. They could deny me a room, but they could not deny me the work. And the work, done right, opens every door. The calls were the hardest part, not because of the questions, but because of the pauses. Those long, heavy silences on the other end of the line when my name didn't carry the kind of weight they respected, when my voice didn't sound like the people they were used to doing business with. I could hear the skepticism before they even spoke. It lived in the careful tone, in the "we'll get back to you" that meant they wouldn't. Every offer I put forward was dissected, not with curiosity, but with quiet doubt, as if they were waiting for me to trip over a detail, to reveal myself as someone playing a game I wasn't invited to join. But I didn't give them the satisfaction. I let the silence hang, unshaken, forcing them to fill it. I didn't push to prove myself in a rush of words. I learned that silence, when held long enough, becomes its own kind of pressure. I asked questions with the steadiness of someone who already knew the answers, and when I didn't, I promised I'd have them in an hour, and I always did. Every conversation was a battle fought without raised voices, without theatrics, just persistence sharpened to a fine edge. Behind those calls, the struggle was relentless. Documents had to be revised 3, 4, 5 times to satisfy lawyers who seemed to enjoy finding reasons to slow the deal. Financing terms shifted like sand under my feet. One week a lender was eager, the next they were cautious, their voices suddenly lined with excuses about market conditions. Brokers, too, tested me, adding clauses they assumed I wouldn't notice, changing numbers by small amounts they hoped I'd overlook. I didn't. My pen was my scalpel, cutting through their doubts line by line. There were nights when the pressure closed in so tight it felt like the air itself was heavier. Alone in my kitchen, the papers spread across the table looked less like opportunity and more like an unending maze. It would have been so easy to walk away, to tell myself they were right, that I didn't belong in this arena. But the memory of that hotel lobby, the way their eyes slid past me as if I were furniture, was a wound that refused to close. That memory kept me at the table long after reason suggested I should leave. I learned to turn their skepticism into fuel. When they doubted, I researched deeper. When they questioned my numbers, I triple-checked them until the figures stood like stone. I found new allies, quiet voices who believed in me not because they knew my story, but because they saw my persistence. The title search agent who rushed my requests because I always thanked her by name. The banker's assistant who slipped me the right form before the official channels would allow it. Little by little, the walls they built to keep me out began to crack, not because I forced them down with brute strength, but because I never stopped knocking, steady and patient, until the sound could no longer be ignored. There was a kind of warfare in that patience, a power in refusing to flinch. I became fluent in reading hesitation, in hearing the difference between no and not yet. My silence wasn't emptiness, it was strategy. And somewhere deep in that process, I realized I no longer feared their doubt. I almost welcomed it, because every time they underestimated me, they handed me the space to surprise them. And soon, very soon, the surprise would be big enough to silence everyone in that lobby for good. The morning I signed the papers, the sky felt different, sharp, clear, as if it knew something in my life was shifting for good. The room where it happened was nothing grand, just a long table, a stack of documents thick enough to hold months of my sleepless nights, and a pen that had passed through a dozen hands before it landed in mine. The lawyers spoke in their precise, clipped phrases. The lender nodded at numbers we had rehearsed, and yet all I could hear was the echo of that first night in the lobby. The cold refusal, the quiet dismissal, the sound of my own breath when I realized they didn't want me there. And now, with one final stroke of ink, I was about to own the very place that had tried to erase me. When the last signature was done, I didn't smile. Not yet. I placed the pen down slowly, the way you set something precious on a shelf you've built with your own hands. The room shifted, subtle but undeniable. In the eyes of everyone present, I was no longer the outsider asking for permission. I was the owner. The title was more than a legal document. It was the physical proof of every long night, every rejection turned into resolve, every whispered doubt I had met with stubborn silence. They slid the keys across the table, small, unremarkable pieces of metal that carried the weight of every locked door I had once been denied. My fingers closed around them, and for the first time in months, I felt the full gravity of what I had done. This was not revenge. It was reclamation. The building itself seemed to lean toward me now, its walls no longer pushing me out, but waiting for me to step inside. I drove to the hotel without ceremony. No media, no applause, no announcement. Just me and the quiet hum of the car engine, the keys heavy in my pocket. Pulling up to the entrance, I saw the revolving door turning as it always had, guests coming and going, staff moving with the same practiced rhythm. Nothing on the surface had changed, and yet everything had. I stepped through the door, and the air inside felt different, warmer, though the same chandeliers glowed above. I walked past the front desk, where they had once turned me away, the carpet soft underfoot, and paused just long enough to feel the weight of that moment. It struck me then, this wasn't just about dignity restored. It was about rewriting the story in the very space where it had once been stripped away. Owning the hotel wasn't an ending, it was the beginning of something far greater. I had not only taken back what was denied to me, I had built the foundation for a future no one could shut me out of again. And as I moved deeper into the lobby, I realized I didn't need to announce the change. The building knew, the walls knew, and soon everyone else would too. It happened 3 days after the deal closed. By then, the news had begun to seep through quiet channels. Rumors traded in hushed voices between staff, half-believed whispers among the regular guests. But I wanted the truth to be spoken clearly, without distortion, so that no one could pretend later they hadn't heard it. The morning of the announcement, I stood behind a podium in the very ballroom that had once been forbidden territory to me. The walls were dressed in gold and cream, the chandeliers dripping light over rows of expectant faces, reporters, community leaders, hotel employees, even a few of the people who had once looked through me as if I were made of smoke. I had rehearsed the words in my head 100 times, but when I stepped to the microphone, I didn't need the script. My voice was steady, but it carried the weight of every silent humiliation, every night of planning, every battle fought without witnesses. "I'm not just a guest here anymore," I said, letting the pause stretch until the room leaned in. "I'm the owner." For a heartbeat, the silence was total, thick and electric, as if the air itself was stunned. Then came the murmur, soft at first, then building, a ripple of disbelief that moved from one side of the room to the other. I saw eyes widen, mouths part in surprise. Some reporters immediately scribbled in their notebooks. Others simply stared at me as if trying to reconcile the man before them with the story they thought they knew. I spoke of my plans, not with arrogance but with purpose, of the renovations that would respect the hotel's history while giving it a future, of the staff who would be treated as partners, not just employees, of the doors that would never again be closed to someone because of who they were, where they came from, or how they were perceived. My words weren't loud, but they carried. They didn't need to roar. Truth, when it's finally given space, has its own volume. When it ended, there was no applause. Not yet. The room was still processing, still rearranging its understanding of what had just happened. But as I stepped away from the podium, I caught sight of a few faces, ones that had once dismissed me, now watching with something almost like respect. I didn't linger to savor it. I didn't need to. The truth was out there now, in the open, unshakable. As I left the ballroom, I passed the lobby. Guests were checking in, bags rolling over marble, keys exchanging hands. Business continued as usual, and yet beneath the surface, something had shifted forever. I was no longer the man waiting to be allowed in. I was the one holding the keys, and that knowledge was worth more than any headline that would run the next day. The decision came to me quietly, without fanfare. Just a simple, deliberate thought. The top floor would be mine, not for a night, not for a week, for as long as I chose. I didn't reserve it to parade my victory or to bask in luxury. I reserved it because I remembered what it felt like to stand in that lobby, stripped of choice, made to feel small. Every room they had once kept from me was now a room I could open with a single gesture. When I walked up to the front desk to make the request, there was no tremor in my voice. "The top floor. All of it," I said, and I could see the brief flicker in the clerk's eyes, the kind that tries to mask surprise behind professional calm. They typed my name into the system, and for a moment I thought about all the times I'd been told there was no record of my reservation, no space left, no place for me. This time, the screen confirmed exactly what I already knew. Every suite, every corner of that floor was now under my name. I took the elevator alone. As the numbers climbed, 10, 11, 12, I felt the hum of the machinery beneath my feet, the quiet promise that I was rising above every locked door, every whispered doubt. When the doors opened, the hallway stretched before me silent and pristine. The soft carpet muted my steps, but inside I felt a thundering, a steady beat that wasn't triumph exactly. It was something deeper, steadier. I walked into the first suite and threw open the curtains. The city stretched out below, the streets and buildings small from this height. For years I'd been on the ground floor of their judgment, looking up at a world I wasn't invited into. Now I could see it all from above, not in arrogance, but in clarity. This was perspective you couldn't buy with money alone. It came from enduring the climb when no one offered you a hand. Room by room, I explored the floor. Some suites still held the faint scent of past guests, perfume lingering in the air, a forgotten magazine on a side table, a champagne cork on the balcony outside. I didn't erase those traces. They were part of the building's life, and now they were part of mine. In the corner suite I paused the longest. It had a view of the entrance where I'd once stood, waiting for someone to decide if I was worthy of entry. From here, the revolving door spun endlessly, and I realized something important. I no longer needed it to stop for me. That night I sat in the largest suite, lights dim, the city glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows. I didn't feel the urge to call anyone or post a picture or announce what I'd done. The quiet was enough. I hadn't reserved the top floor to make a statement to them. I'd done it to make a promise to myself, that no matter who tried to close a door in my face, I would always find a way to unlock it. And now every key in this place answered to me. It began with small shifts, almost imperceptible at first. The same front desk clerk who once looked past me as though I were part of the wallpaper now straightened when I approached, his voice steady but warmer, his eyes no longer darting to the next guest in line. The bellhop, who had once rolled luggage past me without so much as a glance, now nodded with the quiet acknowledgement given to someone whose presence is not only accepted, but expected. There were no grand apologies, no elaborate attempts to rewrite the past, just a subtle rearranging of behavior, the kind that happens when people realize the person they underestimated now holds the keys to the building. I didn't need to remind them. I didn't need to raise my voice or recount the moments they had looked through me. The power of ownership spoke for itself. My name was on every contract, every payroll check, every supply order. The walls carried it, even if no one said it aloud. I could feel it in the way conversations paused when I entered a room, in the way my decisions were now followed without hesitation. It wasn't about fear. It was about recognition. They knew I was no longer asking for a place. I had claimed one, and not a soul could take it away. The most striking change came in the staff meetings. I stood at the head of the long conference table, the same one where I imagined they had once discussed guests like me, only in passing, as problems to be avoided rather than people to be welcomed. Now, their attention was fixed, not because I demanded it, but because they knew I'd done what few dared. I'd turned a rejection into a foundation, a dismissal into a deed, and I carried that victory without arrogance, without needing to remind anyone how the story began. Walking through the halls, I felt the difference in the air. It was no longer the heavy, suffocating quiet of exclusion, but the calm, steady hum of a place that understood its balance had shifted. Housekeepers greeted me by name, their smiles genuine. Engineers stopped me to ask about planned renovations, eager to show me the spaces most guests never see. Even the security guards, once trained to be invisible, nodded in recognition as I passed. I didn't crave their approval, but I valued their respect. Because respect given freely, without demand, is worth more than any forced apology. And perhaps the most satisfying part was knowing I had never once shouted, never once sought to shame anyone publicly. My victory was quiet, steady, and absolute. Ownership wasn't just a title on paper. It was a presence that needed no introduction, no defense. Every day as I moved through the hotel, I could feel the reversal, not as a rush of triumph, but as a deep anchoring peace. I had not taken revenge. I had taken my place. And the beauty of it was that I had done so without breaking a single door, only by holding the keys. It happened on a night when the city outside was washed in rain, the streets below gleaming like polished glass. I was in the lobby, not as an owner checking on operations, but simply walking through, taking in the quiet rhythm of the place as guests drifted in from the storm. That was when I saw him, the hotel manager who had been there the night I was turned away. His suit was the same shade of charcoal as before, his posture still precise, but there was something in his expression now that hadn't been there then. He hesitated before stepping forward, as if testing the floor for cracks. His voice, when it came, was low, not the clipped professional tone I remembered, but something slower, almost careful. "We were wrong," he said, the words weighted down with a kind of sincerity that doesn't come easily. "We never should have excluded you." For a moment I just stood there, letting the words settle. Not because I doubted them, but because I knew how rare they were. Apologies like this don't arrive wrapped in ceremony. They appear unexpectedly, without warning, and they carry all the more meaning for it. I could see the memory in his eyes. The night I stood in that same space, waiting for someone to decide my worth. And now, here he was, standing in the very lobby he once used to keep me out, offering the one thing I had long since stopped expecting. I didn't rush to respond. I didn't need to. This wasn't a moment to seize. It was a moment to let breathe. In that pause, I thought about everything that had happened between then and now. The late nights over contracts, the endless negotiations, the weight of the keys in my hand. I thought about how easy it would be to use his words as fuel for pride, to make him feel the sharpness of my triumph. But that wasn't why I fought for this place. Finally, I nodded. Not to erase the past, but to acknowledge it, to mark it as something that had been seen and understood. I know, I said quietly. Nothing more. Because sometimes the simplest answers carry the deepest weight. He seemed to breathe easier after that, though his eyes still carried the heaviness of what had been done. We didn't linger in the conversation. He returned to his work, and I continued through the lobby, each step steady, unhurried. That night, alone in my suite, I thought about how justice comes in different forms. Sometimes it's loud and undeniable, a public reckoning. Other times, it's a quiet sentence spoken in the rain, carrying more truth than 100 speeches. The apology didn't change the fact that I'd been excluded, but it changed something else. It proved that even those who once shut the door could learn to see the person standing outside it. And in that understanding, there was a peace I hadn't known I was still waiting for. I have learned that forgiveness is not about erasing what happened. It's about refusing to let it own you. When the manager's words lingered in the air that rainy night, I realized my victory didn't hinge on them. His apology was a bridge, but I had already crossed the river long before he built it. I had walked through the storms alone, built my foundation from rejection, and claimed my place without waiting for permission. The real triumph was not in hearing we were wrong. It was in knowing I had stood tall when everything around me tried to make me bend. I thought back to the night in my car, when resolve had first taken root like a seed buried deep in winter soil. I remembered the fatigue in my bones after endless calls, the moments of doubt when I wasn't sure the fight was worth it. And yet here I was, owning the very place where I had once been invisible. That strength didn't come from their change of heart. It came from every time I kept going when no one saw the work I was doing. Forgiveness, I understood now, was not a gift I was giving him. It was a freedom I was giving myself. Holding on to anger would have been easy. It's sharp and loud, and it fills the empty spaces pride can't reach. But letting it go required something far harder. The willingness to see the person who once shut the door and not let their choice define me anymore. I wasn't excusing the past. I was outgrowing it. As I walked the corridors that night, the quiet hum of the hotel felt different. The walls no longer whispered of exclusion. They carried the steady pulse of my presence. Every light that glowed, every door that opened at my command, was proof that I had rebuilt my dignity brick by brick, without tearing anyone else down. My strength had been forged in silence, in persistence, in the long stretch of nights when no one believed in the ending I saw for myself. By the time I reached my suite, the city lights stretched out before me like a living map. Somewhere in those streets were people still waiting for a door to open, still questioning if their place would ever be acknowledged. I knew the answer now. It doesn't come from waiting for someone to invite you in. It comes from standing so firmly in your truth that one day they have no choice but to see you. And that, I realized, was the true power I carried. Not the keys, not the title, not even the building itself, but the knowledge that strength, once claimed, can't be taken back. The transformation of the hotel was not instant. It was steady, deliberate, like a wound healing from the inside out. I walked the halls daily, not as a distant owner hidden behind an office door, but as someone who knew the smell of fresh paint in a newly renovated suite, who noticed when a light bulb in the lobby chandelier dimmed, who could tell by the sound of the boiler when it needed attention. Under my care, the hotel began to breathe differently. Guests lingered longer in the lounge. The staff carried themselves with a quiet pride, and the walls seemed to carry a warmer echo than before. I poured myself into every detail, not to prove anything to those who had once doubted me, but because I wanted this place to stand as a living promise, that dignity, once restored, can spread outward and change everything it touches. The carpets were replaced with patterns that told a story, the kind you notice only if you slow down enough to look. The kitchen's menu shifted to include dishes from the cultures represented by the staff, turning the dining room into a quiet celebration of their roots. We hosted events in the ballroom that once felt like a fortress. Now it was a gathering place for the community, its doors open wider than they had ever been. The numbers followed. Occupancy rose, guest reviews filled with words like warm, welcoming, home. But the success that mattered most to me couldn't be measured in revenue reports. It was in the way the staff smiled when they spoke to guests, the way laughter began to feel as natural in the lobby as the sound of luggage wheels on tile. The hotel no longer belonged only to me. It belonged to everyone who stepped inside and felt seen. And somewhere in the middle of this transformation, I noticed my own reflection had changed. The man who once stood in that lobby with his hands in his pockets, swallowing humiliation, was gone. In his place stood someone who understood that power isn't about control, it's about stewardship. Owning the hotel had given me more than keys to a building. It had given me keys to a part of myself I didn't know I'd been locked out of. There were moments, late at night, when I would take the elevator up to the top floor and stand at the window, looking out over the city. I'd think about the journey, the rejection, the silence, the fight, the purchase, and I'd feel a deep, quiet gratitude. Not for what they had done to me, but for what it had forced me to become. I had turned the coldest moment of my life into the foundation for something thriving and alive. The man once denied a room now held the keys to the whole house. But more than that, he held the unshakable knowledge that no one, not circumstance, not prejudice, not even the weight of a slammed door, could take away the place he had built for himself. And in that truth, I knew the story of this hotel was only just beginning. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels earned. From the corner suite on the top floor, the city stretched endlessly before me, streets like veins of gold light, windows glowing in scattered constellations. I stood barefoot on the cool marble, the curtains drawn wide, letting the world in. This was the view I had once only imagined from the street below, back when I pressed my hope against glass doors that would not open, back when a single nod from someone behind the desk could have changed my night, but didn't. Now there was no desk between me and this place, no one to decide if I belonged. The key in my pocket wasn't temporary. It didn't expire with a checkout time. This room, this floor, this building, it all answered to me. And yet, the weight I felt wasn't the rush of victory. It was something quieter, deeper, a sense of arrival, not just in space, but in self. I walked through the suite slowly, my hand brushing the edges of the furniture, the polished wood warm under my palm. The air carried no trace of exclusion anymore, only the scent of fresh flowers from the vase I had ordered earlier that day. I opened the balcony door, stepping into the cool night air, the hum of the city rising from far below. From here, the noise was softened into something almost melodic. The same streets that had once felt like a maze of locked doors now unfolded beneath me without a single barrier. Leaning on the railing, I thought about that first night, how small I had felt, how invisible. I remembered sitting in my car, breath fogging the windshield, clutching the steering wheel not out of control, but out of a desperation to hold myself together. That man, cold and unwelcome, had no idea what was coming. He didn't know that pain could be alchemized into resolve, that rejection could be rewritten into a story of ownership. This room was more than square footage and a view. It was proof that I hadn't needed their permission, that my worth had never been theirs to measure. They had denied me a room, but in doing so, they had unknowingly handed me the reason to take the whole building, and I had done it, not with noise or vengeance, but with steady, unshakable work. I stepped back inside, letting the curtains fall into place, the city lights still burning in my mind. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I felt the calm settle in, a calm that came from knowing I had built my own place in a world that once told me there wasn't one. I didn't owe my presence here to anyone's kindness, to a sudden change of heart, or to luck. I owed it to the fact that I had taken it with my own hands. And as I lay back, the quiet wrapping around me like a promise, I understood the truest thing of all. I hadn't just claimed the room I always deserved. I had become the kind of person who no longer needed anyone to give it to me.